Reuben was Jacob's firstborn son and ancestor of the Reubenites, who formed one of Israel's 12 tribes. Reuben's story in the Bible became known for his inconstancy. If on the one hand he demonstrated piety and dignity, on the other he showed weakness when he was involved in immorality with Bilhah, the concubine of his father Jacob. And in this video you will know Reuben's true story according to the Bible. Reuben was Jacob's son with Leah. The Bible says that when Jacob went to Padarah to seek a wife among his parents, while fleeing the wrath of his brother Esau, he fell in love with Rachel, Leah's sister and daughter of Laban. Then Jacob made a deal with Laban to marry Rachel. But Laban cheated him, and instead of dealing with his wife Rachel, she gave her Leah. And after a new deal, finally Jacob was able to marry Rachel. But he had to remain married too. And the marital life of the two sisters was of intense rivalry. The Bible says Jacob loved Rachel, while Leah experienced her husband's emotional rejection. But on the other hand, the biblical text says that God made Leah be fertile while Rachel could not have children. And it was in this context that Reuben was born. Reuben's birth occurred in Padanah. The Reuben name in Hebrew literally means a child and is in connection with Leah's statement at the time of her birth. In Genesis chapter 29 and verse 32, we read that Leah declared, after her birth, Reuben is quoted again in the Bible, in an episode that also involved the dispute between her mother, Leah, and her aunt, Rachel. In Genesis chapter 30, from verse 14, the biblical text reports that Reuben was in the field during the wheat harvest when he found some mandrakes and decided to give them his mother. At that time, the mandrakes were used as an aphrodisiac, and people believed that it had certain properties that could favor women's fertility. So when Rachel saw the mandrakes that Reuben had found as a favorite wife, she made a deal to deliver her mandaries in return for being able to spend a night with Jacob. Obviously, Rachel was wrong because power over life was in the hands of God, and not in the alleged aphrodisiac properties of the mandrakes. Even in this episode, who ended up pregnant was Leah, not Rachel. This is what we read in Genesis chapter 30 and verse 17, where the biblical text says that God heard Leah and she conceived and gave birth to her fifth son. Later, when Reuben was already a man formed and Jacob's family was already living away from Padanah, he made a very serious mistake and was marked negatively for it. The Bible says that Reuben has been involved in a clumsy and illicit relationship with Bilhah, the concubine of Jacob. The brief record of this relationship between Reuben and Bilhah is recorded in Genesis chapter 35 and verse 22. The biblical text does not bring details about this episode, but makes it clear that Reuben slept with Bilhah. Scholars argue that Reuben's attitude perhaps was motivated much more for strategic and political purposes within the Laban clan than simply by desire. It may be that when lying down with Bilhah, Reuben wanted to ensure that Rachel's personal servant had no chance to supplant his mother Leah as Jacob's main wife, since Rachel, the wife Jacob loved, had died. Another possibility is that Reuben intended to take the leadership of Jacob's family, as in the former Nearby East. Sometimes a son seized his family's leadership by taking his father's concubine. In any case, the book writer of Genesis only informs that Jacob learned of what Reuben had done, but does not record his immediate emotions. Apparently, Jacob saw him in silence, but he did not forget Reuben's sin, and that had great implications for his final blessing. But if it roared or acted despite sleeping with Bilhah, at least he was the wisest in the episode of the attack on Joseph. When his brothers decided to kill Joseph out of envy, it was Reuben who persuaded them not to commit this crime. Instead, Reuben advised his brothers to put Joseph in a grave with the intention of later being able to free him. Then, when Joseph's other brothers sold him to the Ishmaelites, Reuben was not present. Even he became very distressed when he later found empty the grave he was in. Reuben's behavior before his brothers' plan against Joseph is recorded in the book of Genesis in chapter 37, from verse 37. And later, when Reuben and his brothers were in Egypt acquiring cereals during the time of hunger, to being pressed in the plot armed by Joseph, whom they had not recognized, Reuben interpreted that this complicated situation was the result of God's judgment for what they had done against Joseph. When Joseph's brothers had to bring Benjamin to Egypt, Reuben offered his own children to Jacob as a guarantee of Benjamin's security, as we read in Genesis chapter 42 and verse 37. Then, according to Genesis chapter 46, when he finally revealed his true identity and took his father's whole family to Egypt, Reuben immigrated to the Egyptian lands with his 4 children. Reuben's personal story in the Bible comes to an end at the time of Jacob's blessing. The Bible says that when Jacob blessed his children before he died, Reuben eventually received a kind of anti-bration. Because of his sin with Bilhah, he was deprived of the leadership that the firstborn was entitled. At that time, the biblical text says that Jacob declared about Reuben, "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my strength and the principle of my vigor, the most excellent in highness, and the most excellent in power. Fickle as water, you will not be the most excellent, because it subsides the bed of your father, and then the ewe contaminate it. Substures my bed." Genesis. As Simeon and Levi also lost leadership because of their sins, Judah took the prominence among their brothers. But Reuben's offspring was not deprived of receiving an inheritance in the distribution of land when the territory of Canaan was conquered by the sons of Israel, occupied by the Gad tribe.